Yeah, I was a pastor for 8 years, and one of the things that I learned was the importance of being heard. So I always make sure I ask that. I had pastored a church in Connecticut, and Connecticut is pretty secular, right? And there's only two types of people that go to church in Connecticut. There is the fully committed and the fully broken, right? And I had plenty of both and in our church. And one Sunday, a particular guy that I'd been working with and coming alongside of and just pouring life into came up and said, "Pastor, would you pray for my hearing?" And I thought, what a breakthrough. He's praying, asking me to come alongside of him for physical healing. He is making an enormous amount of progress, and I put my arm around him and I led into it. You know, dear Lord, kind of touch this man's mind, his ears, just break through, so forth and so on, and I just led into it. And I do the amen, and he turns around and he says, "Thank you so much, Pastor. The hearing's on Monday, and I'm facing 4 to 8. You know, it's like you need to listen. You need to be heard, and you need to listen, and you need to listen well, right? So thank you, Pastor, for allowing me to speak this morning, and thank you, veterans. My brother Lawrence, whom I love dearly, I was always envious. I don't know if you know that he was a fighter pilot. And like that is the ultimate, you know, to me, to be a fighter pilot, to be in one of those things and then sailing off a ship. But he tells me it's not the taking off part, it's the landing part. And I always wanted to do that, but I'm just, I wasn't built for it. I think up here, but it takes a lot to make that happen. I want to spend a few minutes just introducing myself and who I am. Above all else, I'm a sinner saved by grace, right? I am the son of a king who has the mind of a pauper. I have both the purple robe of a prince and filthy rags. I have nothing to offer that has not been given to me by someone else. And my wife and children think I'm a knucklehead. So you're going to have a chance to decide, you know, where we land on that. Speaking of my wife, that is my wife. I have been married for 38 years, surprisingly to the same woman, right? And she puts up with me in spite of my flaws. She married a poor college student, and then was subjected to 25 years of being the wife of a business executive, and then had to endure 8 years as a pastor's wife. And it is too hard to explain how difficult that role is. And I just want to encourage you to love your pastor's wife. Honestly, it is a very difficult role. And my wife liked to remind me, of course, she married a person who was aspiring into business, winds up at a pastor's wife, and she'd always remind me she did not marry a pastor, right? So, but today, my wife never sees me as I travel all over the country with MedSend. Half the time, I'm not sure that she knows I'm gone, but most of the time she does. And I think it's when the trash goes out, she knows I'm home, right? That's the deal. And we have 4 beautiful daughters, and you can see that above. It'll drive a father crazy. And I used to roam our yard with a shotgun, daring any young man to come across the line. Not really, but you know, we are blessed as a family to have a tight relationship with one another. My wife, when the girls were growing up, she demanded that they never go to bed mad at one another. And that has protected their friendship, and they are close friends to one another even to this very day. It's really been a blessing. And if you note, right, one of these things is not like the other, right? I mean, I have spent the majority of my adult life living with 5 women, And I don't have to tell you how involved I was with men's ministry. I was very much there. I remember a time a number of years ago when I attended a Promise Keepers event, and I was coming downstairs. It was dinner time. The family had assembled. I was coming downstairs, and I saw the laundry there. So I grabbed the laundry basket, and I walked downstairs with the laundry basket. I walked past the room where the family was meeting, and my one daughter, she stands up and she says, she notices me carrying it by, and she said, "Promise Keepers." So it's been an amazing journey, and you might ask me what I have learned spending the majority of my adult life with 5 women. I learned this very early, and I'm just saying that if I wanted peace and contentment in my life, I needed to learn this and live it out. But I did become a grandfather for the first time. My wife and I celebrated the birth of our first granddaughter. And do you care to guess the sex? You know, a beautiful baby granddaughter, right? So we have just really been blessed. And, it's, I was pleased to really consider, as it was a girl being born, that I would at least know what to do, right? No. After all these years, I still don't have a clue about women. I have a father, I'm a husband, a father, now a grandfather, I've been a pastor, and I'm sorry, ladies, we just don't get it, right? I mean, all this work that I've done, I still don't understand, I have to admit, but you can move on. I've had just about every role you can imagine in the local church, right? When my wife and I were married, our first church, I was setting up chairs in a gymnasium where we were meeting, right? So we were breaking up and setting down, and I served teaching the 6th and 7th graders in Sunday school. And if any of you are doing that, God bless you. That is a tough role. It is really amazing. And I was very humbled by doing it, I have to tell you. I've ran men's ministry. As I mentioned, I was very involved in men's ministry. And then I sat on the missions board, international missions board of our local church, and I was an elder. And then I spent 8 years as the pastor of a non-denominational church, as I mentioned, in Stamford, Connecticut. And it was a beautiful, small, little New England church. You can see it there. Just absolutely gorgeous. It's what you'd expect. But there had been a church split, and the church was very wounded. I had no idea. My wife and I had only been in 2 churches in our married life. I mean, when we commit, we hang around. Even if you don't want us to hang around, we still hang around. And I had no idea what that was like, and it was very difficult. I loved being their pastor, but it was a tough job. It was a tough job. It's one of the toughest jobs. I thought I had been prepared for it, but I had no idea. And trust me, I had to work alongside of Lawrence at one point, and I know tough jobs, right? So, but pastoring was the most difficult one I've done. And today, I mentioned that I'm the president and CEO of an organization called MedSend. And what we do is when a healthcare professional finishes their college education, and that's pretty broadly defined. It can be a doctor, a nurse, dentist. We have veterinarians, physical therapists, all the way down nutritionists, pretty broadly defined. Once they finish their education, if they're willing to go and serve throughout the world as a long-term missionary, we will take their educational debt and we will make the monthly payment as long as they stay out. So you can imagine a physician in today's world what the educational debt levels are. And it is just a blessing to be able to free them to go and to serve. And sometimes they serve in very difficult conditions. This photograph that you see there, that's the MedSend grant recipient directly in front of you. And this is one of the worst places that I have ever visited. I do get a chance to go around the world and visit some of these places. And this is in Uganda, Bundebujo, Uganda, and this is the ward for women with children. And if you'll notice, most of them are on the ground, right? The beds are on the ground. And it is as bad as it looks. I went to the fella after we had toured his little facility there, and I asked him, can I help you with something? Maybe an x-ray machine? I mean, anything basic? And his response was, no. And I look at him like, really? And he's like, look, if it ever broke, I couldn't repair it. I really couldn't get the materials you need for slides. And I generally don't know when I'm going to have electricity. So, no, I can't use it. If something's beyond what I'm capable of diagnosing myself, I can't do anything about it anyway. So this is an extreme case, right? It's not all like that. We wind up seeing these healthcare professionals in about 3 different areas in general. The first one is one-to-one medicine. It's what you would expect, right? Individuals delivering medicine, saving lives, incredible stories. Women and children in particular touch my heart, and those stories are oftentimes miraculous. So that's one form. The other form is intentional replication. That is that these individuals are training nationals. So they take their Western education and they go and they train other individuals in areas of forming expertise like surgery, OBGYN, and so forth, even pediatrics. And then they will go and train, so they're training a trainer, and they'll go out and then train others. So they're doing replication of their own skill set. And then finally, some are transforming national healthcare systems. They wind up, because of their education, because they're coming from the West, United States specifically, they will be invited in by the Minister of Health. And oftentimes they are asked to do various things for them. We have one woman who is in the stands. She's trained in emergency medicine, and she is in one of the stands, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, that area up there, former Soviet Union. And the Minister of Health asked her if she would write the manual on emergency medicine for the country, and then go to all the hospitals and train the physicians. Now, can you imagine an American, a woman in a Muslim majority country, right, being asked by the Minister of Health to do this and to have access to, how many times do you think she's asked the question? And the question is, why are you here, right? So you can't proselytize in a lot of these places, and she wasn't able. She couldn't just walk up to somebody on the street and say, do you want to know Jesus? It doesn't work that way, right? You get yourself in a lot of trouble, including getting sent home or worse. And but when someone says to you, why are you here? You can say, I am here because I love Jesus, he loves you, and I want to be his hands and feet, bringing his love to you and your country. They can do those kinds of things. So it's very powerful. And of course I could go on, but I have a different subject that I'm going to talk about today, and that is the Philadelphia Eagles. No, it's not. Oh yeah, we got, I'm always nervous. Anytime I'm near Dallas, I feel the heat. It's like, whoa, and that game is today, right? So it's Eagles versus Dallas today. So, but I am so glad. We don't have any Cowboys fans, do we here? No, this is an ordained church, I can tell. You couldn't have Cowboy fans here. That wouldn't happen. But I was born and raised outside of Philadelphia in a planned community of the 50s and 60s called Levittown, Pennsylvania. And it was a great place to be a kid. It really was. We were lower middle class. Mom and Dad worked most of the time to make ends meet. Most of them, both had to work. We weren't poor, but I do remember the electricity being turned off. I remember the water being turned off until the bill was paid. And I remember eating surplus government food. And trust me, that powdered milk was horrible, just absolutely horrible. It just tasted so bad, but more on that a little later, right? And I was raised to be a consumer. right? Now, most of you will not recognize what this is, but it is the J.C. Christmas catalog. And when the Christmas catalog would arrive just before Thanksgiving, my sister and I would sit there as two little programmed consumers, going page by page, circling all the things that we were going to get, right? I mean, it was just amazing. And it was all designed that if only I could have G.I. Joe, the Lego set, I could be somebody, right? I could be somebody if I just had it. Since the 1950s, advertisers have spent billions and billions of dollars trying to do research on our brains, right? To look at our behaviors and then taking those findings and serving them up to us on a platter designed to create discontent, right? They want you to be discontented. You know, it is absolutely amazing. All of this effort has gone into that. And they want you to have a sense of entitlement. You deserve it. Of course you deserve it. Go for it, right? And as Christ followers, there's a tension between the love of our neighbors that Christ teaches us and his requirement that we live a sacrificial life, right? There's this tension there, and it's in the face of this constant bombardment of advertising that is trained on us, right? And it's really programming us to think about our own comfort and our own pleasures. And there's this constant need for self-fulfillment that is being developed into us. So, you know, I spent a little time looking at the notion of poverty and what is poverty. Now, some of you would like this kind of poverty, huh? Would you like a shot at it at least, you know? It's hard to look at this and say that there is any form of poverty being exhibited here. But poverty is not only of material things, right? That's what we think of. We think of poverty of material things. But there's poverty of the spirit. There's poverty of love. And trust me, many homes that look like that, with those kind of toys outside, there's not any love, right? There's a real poverty of love. And as I mentioned, I grew up in a lower middle class family. I did not experience significant material poverty. I just didn't. But I did experience poverty of the spirit, poverty of the mind, and poverty of love. I experienced it all. My mother became pregnant with me when she was 18. She was running away from an abusive family. My father did the right thing and married her. And he was 20 at the time, and he had grown up in foster care. So we have a woman, 18 years old, running away from an abusive family. We have a young man, 20, 21 years old, running away from a very difficult background where he was abused, sometimes by people who called themselves Christ followers. And they come together, and this is the result. Go figure that, right? So that's the result of where I came from. And, you know, we didn't live in poverty, but it doesn't have to be material poverty for you to be in poverty, right? There's so many other kind. And when you are in poverty of any one of these forms, you learn to steward yourself every day to get through and just exist. And next slide. So I took a look at what does it mean for biblical stewardship, right? And you can see there Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord and is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live it. And that's Psalm 24:1. Do you believe that? Do you fundamentally believe that everything belongs to God? It's fundamental to who we are as Christ followers, right? It really is a fundamental principle of biblical stewardship. And when you have been programmed to consume, when you've been programmed for your own pleasure, right? You've been programmed to expect that I deserve it. It's hard to turn your back and say, wait a minute, none of this is mine. It all belongs to God, right? Ultimately, we are just managing this world for our Father, right? That is what we're doing. To be a good steward in the Old Testament was to be the number one slave, right? To be a good steward was to be the number one slave. And they were slaves over their master's resources. And if you think for a moment, you think of Joseph and his role in the household of Potiphar. If you think of Charles Carson in Downton Abbey, for those of you who are Downton Abbey fans, right? I mean, that's what it is, right? A steward is as good as the king when you approach the palace or the home, right? You do not go above the steward or you risk the wrath of the king, right? So it's a very senior position. Next slide. So we see right from the beginning of the Bible, this is a quote from Genesis 26 through 28, and it says, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and then have dominion over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the heaven, and over the livestock, and all the earth, and every living, creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image, and in the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, and God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and every other living thing that moves on this earth. We're looking at God essentially talking to man and saying, okay, you're the steward, right? You're as good as me when you're in this land. Watch over it, take care of it, protect it, but ultimately recognize it's mine, right? It's not yours. And that is, a good steward recognizes that, right? Now, I love this quote from R.C. Sproul, which essentially says, fundamentally, stewardship is about exercising our God-given dominion over his creative, reflecting the image of our Creator. God is the care, responsibility, maintenance, protection, and beautification of his creation. So that's what we are being held accountable for. And what does God ask us specifically to be stewards over, right? What are those elements? What are those things that he's asking us to steward over? And first, of course, we just read it, is to care for the earth, right? To care for his creation. Right from the beginning, we're called to name the animals, right? And then to care for them. So it is the environment in which we live in. And as Christ followers, as bad a job as we've done, quite frankly, caring for the earth, God does expect us to care for his creation. And it is at every level, right? He asks us to care for ourselves and our families. He tells us that we are the temple in which God resides, right? So our bodies are the temple, and we are to care for them. We are to care for our families. And I have to tell you that I am just absolutely thrilled to be in a church that is honoring single mothers on Thanksgiving. As I was sitting there, I'm telling you the truth, I had chills. Just goosebumps up and down my arms. I love a church that would do that, right? That is, I think that is what our calling is all about, right? We're to care for his church, which is one another. So we're to care for our families. But even in the Bible it says, so that's easy. It's easy to care for your families. How about caring for your enemies? I'm not there. I am not there. I am sorry. I'm just not. I wish I was. I don't know how to deal with that. All right? I've got this terrible past. It's very checkered. I've got, a lot of hurts and wounds, and forgiveness doesn't come easy to me. Right? It just doesn't. And yet I know as a Christ follower that I'm being asked to forgive. Not only forgive, but to love that individual as much as God loves me. Oh, please. Come on. Couldn't it have been a little easier? Couldn't the bar have been lowered, at least for people like me? Couldn't I just kind of get under? No. He makes it clear. And it's a challenge each and every day, right? But this is what he asks us to steward over. It's the whole thing, right? The day that you call yourself a Christ follower, you become accountable to be a steward, right? I spent a lot of time, with the global church, the big C, capital C, where I see brothers and sisters all over the world that are hurting, right? I mean, you don't typically go to a doctor unless you're hurting, and to see the kinds of things that I see, it's just absolutely heartbreaking, especially if you're being asked to steward over it. You feel a sense of responsibility for it, where mothers put their children in wheelbarrows and walk for 2 days to get to health care. And that exists. I mean, it's very real, and it is happening to individuals that we should consider to be our brothers and sisters throughout the world. It's a high degree of accountability. And if you've been given God's resources to manage, then you are accountable for it as well, right? And our brothers and sisters who are persecuted and hungry and displaced throughout the world. Do you know that right now there are more refugees in the world than there was during World War II? Yeah, it was a percentage for a while, and it was okay because they weren't comparing actual numbers, but now we've surpassed, and the actual number of refugees in the world exceeds World War II, and yet we will not recognize that there's a war going on in the world, right? And one of the reasons I believe that is because it's spiritual. It's spiritual. And we live in what is now a secular nation, and those that control the information don't want to talk about it. They don't want to recognize that this is a spiritual battle that is occurring, because frankly, there's not a lot of other reasons. It doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense at all. But when you look at it through a spiritual lens, you recognize it, and you recognize your own accountability for it. Now, next slide, please. So, I've got a BHAG. Those of you in business know what a BHAG is, a big, hairy, audacious goal, right? Well, I have totally ripped it off, and I'm calling mine the big... it rolls right off, it rolls right off your tongue, right? So it's the big, painful, God-awful question, right? And I'm going to ask you this question today. So I want you to think about the blessings in your life. What a great time to do it, right? We're going to be into Thanksgiving here. And I want you to take a moment. I'm going to shut up. And I want you just for a second to close your eyes and think about the blessings in your life. And it might be your family. It could be your career, your home, your toys. And you can notice, I managed to get something in there for the ladies. There's the shoes, the clothes, the jewelry, and the guys, the boats, the guns, and the motorhomes. And it could be your friends. It could be this church. Now, wait a minute. You guys are... I see heads looking around going, I'm not so sure, but no, it could be your church, right? So just take a moment and literally name your blessings right now at this time of your life. Okay. I trust you came up with a few, but let me tell you that if you could not name any blessing, Lawrence is going to be handing out $10 bills afterwards, and you'll at least have that as a blessing, right? So, all right. So, next slide. Now, which one of the things that you thought about are you not willing to hand to God? What is it? Think about what came to mind, whatever it is. If it was more than one, what are you not willing to surrender? I found myself, I was a corporate guy, right? I was in the software business. I was very ambitious. I went, as I moved through my career, I was always getting promoted. I was always having more responsibility. I was seeking after that responsibility. And I found myself at one point, I laid myself off. The company that I was with consolidated. I was vice president of sales and marketing on a global scale, and we were condensing right after the internet bubble. And we had to lay off people. I went through 4 rounds of layoffs, and then finally I went to my boss, who was the CEO, and I said, you can get rid of me now. You don't need me. I'm too expensive. And I essentially laid myself off. Which at the time was the appropriate thing to do. However, what I didn't know, and by the way, it was the spring when I did it, so I figured, I'm going to take a summer off. I had worked nonstop since I was in high school. I worked my way. I did not go directly to college out of school. I worked in a factory for a while. My father owned a bar, and I worked as a bartender for a while. And then my life imploded at one point, and I went back to college and I got my degree, but I worked through it all, right? I worked and I worked and I worked, and I never really took any significant time off. I am not proud to tell you that. I took short vacations because I was so ambitious. And I decided I was going to take the summer off. My daughter was getting ready to graduate from high school and head off to college, so I took the summer off and I really enjoyed it. And then I started calling around, trying to see, hey, what's going on in August? And everybody said, just wait, it's still summertime. Things will open back up again. And I was in Connecticut. I'd been working primarily in New York City. And that was August of 2001. And September 11th hit. And everything froze. And I could not find a job. And it was the first time in my life that I had to come to the decision that I was not in control of my life. Now, can you imagine that? I had totally convinced myself I was in charge of my own life, of my own destiny, and where I was going. Even though I was a Christ follower, I was a committed Christ follower. But I realized for the first time, and I had a dream. Now, I'm not a dreams guy, right? I do believe God speaks to us through dreams, by the way. I hear it all the time. Today, God is speaking to Muslims through dreams at a rate that you cannot believe. I deal with doctors, right? Doctors are scientifically minded. They want to know the facts. They want to see it, right? And yet they'll come to me and they'll say, people are coming to me left and right saying they had a dream. They had a dream of a lamb. They had a dream of blood. They had a dream of a cross. These are people who have never They've never heard the name Jesus. It is amazing what's going on, right? But I had a dream. And it was significant enough that I still remember it today. And I was standing in the dark, fully naked. Now, don't visualize that. It'll ruin your day. It'll ruin your day. Don't try. But there I was standing there fully naked, and God spoke to me and said, take a step. And I looked around, and it was black, total darkness. And I didn't move. God spoke to me again, and I looked down in total fear. And I didn't move. God spoke to me the third time and said, take a step. And I woke up, and I knew immediately I didn't trust God. Wow. I didn't trust God. What are you not willing to trust God with? I made a pact afterwards, not long afterwards, as I dealt with the dream. And I laid it all out. I laid it out. I named the things that God could take from me. You can take the house, right? And I'd been a successful business guy. We had this incredible house. You can take the cars. You can take the toys. You can take the career. You can take it all. Just leave me my family. Just leave me my family. Don't take my family from me. And several years later, one of my children were struggling. And my wife turned to me and she said, "You need to let the family go. You need to trust God with your family. You need to trust that His plan is better than your plan." And I have goosebumps as I'm standing here because this is very hard to say. What is it that you are not willing to trust God with? Right? Because that's the thing you need to take to prayer. That's the thing you need to release. And trust me, you are looking at an individual that does not surrender well. I don't give up well. I don't offer what I've worked really hard to achieve well, right? I let go, and she's doing much better, by the way. Nothing in the end belongs to us, right? It belongs to God. And I went up to New York City to compete, right? My father loved Frank Sinatra, and we were always here, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Well, I looked around and I figured, all right, if I go to New York City, if I make it there, I can make it anywhere, right? And I worked long and I commuted hard. And then when I heard that it was time to surrender, I'm like, what? You got to be kidding me. You know, that just can't be. That just can't be. And as I've gone through this process, I just look forward to the day, and I hope that as God matures me, that when I get there, He'll say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." Yeah. Right? I mean, that's ultimately what we hope for. Next slide. So, just in review, it's all God's, right? It's focusing on the fact that fundamentally He owns it all. We are to be nothing but stewards, managing that well. And that includes the relationships that we're given. It includes the people. It includes your church, right? It includes your finances. It includes your family. It's all of it. So, the question that I have is, what's stopping you? What's getting in the way, right? What are the elements? And sometimes it's a lack of faith. And I have to tell you that I'm standing here, having been a pastor, I'm running a global missions organization, I've been an elder of a big church, I've done all of this stuff. And it was a lack of faith. That's what was stopping me. It was a lack of faith. I did not trust God. Right? What is it with you? Right? Is it a lack of trust? Or could it be worse? Could it be sin? Fundamental sin, greed, envy, jealousy, or lordship over your own life? Right? I want to be in control of me. I want to be in control of the outcomes. I am not going to surrender anything. Right? Maybe I don't have the faith. Maybe I don't have the trust. It doesn't make a difference. I want to be Lord over my life. What is it that's getting in your way? Why wouldn't you surrender whatever it was that came to your mind? Right? The interesting thing is that we are told that there is this notion of progressive stewardship, right? Next slide. And that is, well done, my good and faithful servant. That's what we're hoping for. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness, right? That's Jesus with a parable in Matthew. And what he's telling us is to be faithful right where you are. You may be sitting in your seat today thinking, I don't have a lot of resources. I don't have a lot to give, right? I don't have the ability to be able to do the kinds of things that I would like to do, that I feel God might be calling. It doesn't make a difference. Start where you are, right? Start loving the people in your life. Start surrendering those things that you hold so dear, right? I mean, I had my hand on the wheel of life, and they were white. They were white-knuckled as I'm trying to drive my own life, right? I've let that go. I still have a lot of responsibilities, particularly at MedSend. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that it's fine, because trust me, there are times a year when money's getting tight, and I lose sleep. But I recognize it for what it is. It's a lack of faith. It's a lack of trust, right? And when I do that, I say, well, God, help me to relax. Help me to sleep. Help me to see that it's not me. The songs today, you just got to show up, right? Do what he's asking us to do, and he comes around us. And he doesn't only come around us, but he gives us more. He gives us more. My parents divorced, and when I was in my 30s, I already started a family, and my dad kind of left. It was still in the general area, but it left my mother in a very precarious position. She was wound up living in a damp and dank basement, and it absolutely broke my heart. And my wife and I, we had 2 kids at the time, and we had just bought our first home. And I thought, there's just absolutely nothing that I can do. And we prayed and prayed and prayed, and then an opportunity came up where we were able to build a house for my mother. And about 4 years ago, she died in that house. But the point is that as we were being faithful with what he had given to us, he opened the door, and we never wanted again. We never wanted for the money, the mortgage that we were paying. My children never paid a sacrifice for it, really. God blessed that decision, right? God will give us more if we're faithful with what we've got, right? And I just want to encourage you today, as I finish here, to challenge yourself. What is it that you're not willing to surrender? Right? God bless you, and thank you for allowing me to speak with you this morning.